I watching a very special edition of Agenda AWANI because not only will I be looking at the post-budget, key takeaways for certain sectors, especially sectors that we want to look at to blaze through the tsunami of digital disruption and Industrial Revolution 4.0, but also we're going to lead into the most happening first time ever forum and thought leadership event that bring together experts from the communication industry from around the region to look at the impact, digital disruptions of media and communications. So the best person to talk about this will be from the institution that always analyze the future, and that's Sudev Banga, the Managing Director of IDC ASEAN. Thank you so very much, Sudev, for making time to be here with me.
Thank you.
I want to link Budget 2018 to thought leadership first, because if you look at COMA, that's happening very soon, and you're going to be a key player, the first ever ASEAN level discussion, bringing together, supposedly competing communication players from within Malaysia and the region. But actually, I keep telling people that, hey, the other media institution in Malaysia or in Singapore, Indonesia, they're not my rivals actually. My biggest competitors are the giants of the world called Facebook, Google, because they keep on having our content on their platform, but I have no way of getting anything from that content, for example. So going into the budget 2018 with that in mind, the budget seems to also be wanting to prepare Malaysians from the industry side, from the consumer side, into the changing ecosystem of the world. And for example, Jack Ma came here recently, and he said, which the PM agrees, that even if you have a durian, if a Musang King, you can't just be selling Musang King to Malaysians, because maybe you can only sell it at 40 to 50 per kilogram, and that's the highest bracket. But if you sell to China, and you can just pack it on my e-commerce platform, you're selling at more than 100 ringgit Malaysia per kilogram. So I want to go to the takeaways from that perspective of Budget 2018, since you guys analyze the future.
Sure. So from our perspective, if you look at the overall budget, I think we are fairly satisfied in terms of the number of digital initiatives and allocation for digital initiatives in there. Was it as digital as we wanted it? Perhaps not, but we think it's adequate enough at this point in time for us to say that the country is set on the right path moving ahead towards 2025 and achieving the digital economy. There were several highlights we were very excited about, whether it is a focus on industries, on automation, robotics, aerospace. We enjoyed that a lot in Thrust 1. Okay. We think that was perhaps underplayed and very quickly missed in a lot of the discussion, because robotics as an area, as an underlining area to support industries and to bring them to a different level.
Especially SMEs.
Oh yeah.
There's always this perception that our reliance, for example, on the old ways, like the millions of registered foreign workers, I think it's near to 2 million, the official count, is because the majority of business institutions in this country, which is actually SMEs, they're still relying on foreign labor.
Yes.
And that put paid to the idea that the adoption of technology like robotics is being pushed back.
Right.
So, for me, it's like a chicken and egg situation. If you take away, then would they take?
Right.
Or that will come in and this will go.
Yeah.
So how do you think? Because I think the awareness is there.
Yep.
The political will clearly is there from the budget. But again, we're looking at implementation and execution.
Yeah, it's a grand old debate. I mean, a lot of countries outside of Malaysia with a higher population go through that debate. Automation automatically paints a very scary picture for majority of people, simply because, does that mean I lose my job? What is going to happen to the unskilled labor out there? Where are they going to go? Where are they going to be attached to? And then that is where a quality improvement process is going to be extremely important. And again, the execution is going to be very critical to pay attention to. I think over time, Malaysia has been the envy of many Southeast Asian countries when it's come to initiatives, but it hasn't been the envy when it's come to execution of the initiatives. That has been a little bit of the struggle over there. So I think going ahead for the next 10 years, that's going to be a key emphasis point for a lot of the initiatives to execute properly is going to be putting around the right ecosystem, the right enablers, the right people to carry Malaysia forward to 2025.
Let's look at the digital transformation. You know, it's a big thing. Jack Ma doesn't just go to any country.
Oh, yeah.
And he
Definitely.
chooses well where he wants to park his interest. And but it's quite ironic in a sense where a lot of chatter at the grassroots level is the big brand of China. People look at China, saw how huge it is, not just in terms of population, but now in terms of the size of its economy. And they worry that it'll be like the flood in Penang recently, that will come very fast.
Right.
Over just a few hours, hundreds of millimeters of rainfall.
Yeah.
And then we'll be inundated. But I think if we put on the screening glasses of technology, then we can see where we park ourselves in the supply chain.
Correct.
I think the discussion must center more and more and gravitate towards that kind of discussion rather than just the macro China, Malaysia.
Oh, yeah.
Because what do we actually want from initiative like the DFTZ?
Oh, absolutely. I think we can't do everything. And I think that tends to be the problem every time if we do want to embark on large initiatives. We hope to be able to do everything. Unfortunately, we have to pick our spots. And the world is so competitive at this point in time that, you know what, if it doesn't work out in Malaysia, for example, there's Indonesia, which is
Correct.
rising really quickly.
Yes.
There's Philippines, which is rising really quickly. So ultimately, we have to pick our spot. We have to be able to communicate, create that ecosystem which is going to enable SMEs to also be part of that supply chain, enable the rakyat to be able to be
Correct.
part of this
Okay,
initiative.
so I have to go for the first break. Hold that thought.
All right.
I want to go there exactly. Enable the SME, enable the rakyat.
Perfect.
But how? You know, we saw what the Prime Minister said that, you know, we're looking at 1,200, 1,500. Suddenly now we have close to 2,000 on the first day.
Yeah.
The FTZ goes online, the SME coming in. But we have hundreds of thousands of SMEs.
it.
How come there's only 2,000? Why can't by this week it should be multiplying to 5, 10, 20? How do we have this mass migration of our SMEs into the digital platform, plus the people too? Let's talk about that after this short break. We congratulate ourselves because it's not easy for Jack Ma to choose any country. He chooses Malaysia and he likes Malaysia. He said it in his speech. AWANI dissected many of his key points during his recent visit. You can catch that on astroawani.com and in our app. But I want to tap your wisdom way back to way before you even joined the professional rat race. You took actually psychology when you were studying in university. So I want to go into the psychology of things, of facing disruptions, digital disruption, because first and foremost, we mentioned that before just now when we said people fear losing their jobs.
Yep.
That fear factor. Yes, digital is, you know, frightening if you just look at it one big basket of something. But if you go inside, people didn't fear. Malaysians spend more than 6 billion on smartphones. I mean, talk about not fearing technology, right?
Right.
So that's the latest Engadget. People queue. Some Malaysians went to Singapore just to line up for iPhone 10.
Right.
How do we translate this
Yeah.
into the adoption of robotics, of big data analytics, and everything else, IoT?
No, it's a good question because ultimately there's going to be a risk-reward mentality, right? Majority of IT initiatives are still seen as a cost and seen as a risk, and everyone is afraid to take a risk to a certain point, especially if it involves perhaps the entire business model having to be transformed. That's where the fear of the unknown comes in, especially for companies who've sat there for a long time saying that, you know what, I've been great doing this for 30 years. So why should I actually change my fundamentals, which have worked for me for the past 30 years fantastically, into a new business model, which is perhaps untried, untested, not enough case studies, not enough use cases for me to say this is where I should go.
Yes.
So ultimately now we're sitting there and saying that, am I listening to a fortune teller or am I listening to an analyst?
Yeah.
Because if I'm listening to a fortune teller who's telling me something is going to happen, I may not necessarily believe you.
Yes.
If I listen to an analyst who brings facts into the table, that's when it becomes real and something to pay attention to. So that fear of the unknown tends to be what is inhibiting a lot of people.
Okay. Let's throw the baby and the bathwater out. Let's start clear. A few years ago, when you look into the future, did you see institutions like Grab coming out of this country and then being what it is now? I'm still amazed at the fact that Grab, hey, it is Malaysian origin, you know,
Right.
copyrighted and sealed just right there.
Right.
But we want to see more of that.
Yep.
We want to see, you know, the fashion valleys of the world. We want to see Rupee, the B2B, whatever, and growing. But
Right.
how do we enlarge that? And how do we speed that up?
Yep.
Because I think things that's based on the smartphone and mobile application, I think might be the lower hanging fruits for us, rather than straight away fighting the Googles of the world and the
Yep.
Facebooks of the world.
Yep. Oh, sure. I mean, there's a few ways to slice a cat, but if you reverse back about 10 years ago, one of the models we were talking about was called the third platform, and that was the emergence of born-on-the-internet companies which were going to disrupt traditional businesses. We talked about it for quite a bit, and then we started to add elements of fintech, those disrupting logistics companies. I mean, Uber and Grab was something which was feeding into an amazing need required by majority of citizens, and that's what really propelled them to where they are today. However, we could not obviously predict specifically how Grab was going to be, but we did predict the whole idea around born-on-the-internet companies disrupting traditional business models, where there's even media, which alludes us to even next week, what we will be discussing about, is going to be around how the media has been reacting to that idea of digital disruption, the so-called born-on-the-internet companies.
Yes.
So again, it's just picking our spots, picking the initiatives we want to be good at, and riding on those, rather than being a jack of all trades and master of none at the end of the day.
When you talk about born in the internet, I mean, from the technology sense, business sense, it's a no-brainer, right? But we do have other stuff, like regulations,
Sure.
like public perception. I mean, you look at ASEAN, so I do not have to remind you of all these demonstrations, thousands of people going on the street, not wanting Uber and Grab.
Right.
Like in Jakarta, it was
Right.
huge. It's almost like a political rally.
Correct.
So how do you see this coming to an equilibrium?
Yeah.
Would it be coming soon? Because our Gen Y and the millennials, they're like nobody's business. We rank highest or two next highest in many social media stuff, for example.
Right. There was really three phases, a lot of what ASEAN countries went through when these disruptors came in. The first phase was essentially almost like denial. Disruptor, again, I've been in the business for so long, it's not going to disturb me, we will kill them off. And I think a lot of industries went through that phase, unfortunately. The next phase was then acceptance of the disruption, because they realized that they were not going away, they weren't fly-by-night companies, it was going to occur, and they did have to rethink their business model. Now, if you go to the third phase, which is where we are now, it's all about partnerships. It's about reaching that equilibrium. So if you see some of the partnerships that Grab has had with taxis, right, to actually match up the expectations, the service levels, and to bring their game up as well. Overall, the winners are us, you, me, the citizens. We are the ones who actually win when these things happen, when the partnerships occur. Banks with fintechs, very similar. Media companies with digital advertising companies. We see a lot of partnerships around that angle as well, together with telecommunications companies as well. So this is the brilliance of it at the end of the day. Over the next 10 years, we expect more partnerships to occur. We expect more people working together to want to score a more direct goal collectively rather than singularly.
Correct. For partnerships to happen, there must be trust. For trust to be there, there must be discourse. For discourse to be there, there must be more rigorous discussions on subject matters like this.
Yes.
Across Malaysian streets, Singaporean streets, Jakarta, Sulawesi, Vietnam, Phnom Penh, wherever it is. So I have to go for the last break, but once we are back, I want to look at communications ASEAN, the Content Summit, COMA, and because to me that's the central of all things. If we don't use the new platforms of discourse, then where would the discussions be? In Silicon Valley, it's a no-brainer. You go to any branded coffee outlets and you probably bump into a serial entrepreneur, there's a venture capitalist there, there's somebody just looking to give money, there's a serial idealist who always plan ideas out but never took it on, but can work with somebody. But how do we have that kind of ecosystem in ASEAN, in Malaysia, in Singapore, in Jakarta, whatever it is? I want to ask your wisdom on that right after this short break, because COMA is coming. We have to be more strategic in the new era, because like it or not, we don't control everything anymore. Nobody controls everything anymore. From the scientific field, there has been no single winner of the Nobel Prize since the 90s, since I've been covering it, and that's more than 2 decades. And if you look at trade, Malaysia is very open to international trade, and we can't do things alone either. Even we have paddy fields, but you remember when the price of grain went up, including the price of, looking at the paddy fields of Malaysia, we only have 20 to 30%. So we have to import from others. Imagine in the new era of the fourth industrial revolution, where it comes together with many other stuff, like disruptors, for example. Airbnb doesn't own any hotels, but they are really better in certain areas than a lot of traditional hotel and stay providers. Uber and Grab, they do not own their own cars, but they provide cars for us to move around from point A to point B, even motorcycles in Jakarta and places like that. So this is the new thinking. There's no way the old thinking could have migrated here without a disruption. But disruption also means a lot of taxi drivers, for example, now had to go and do other stuff. They can't migrate, they can't relearn, they can't reskill themselves. So this is why I think conversation must happen. If taxi drivers saw the coming of Uber and Grab years ago, then slowly they can prepare themselves. I think people fear disruption when it comes hard, it comes fast, like the storm and the flood in Penang, for example. So how do we have this discourse so that we prepare? I mean, COMA is coming, and that's what we here want to do, because if we don't talk about it, it's out of sight and out of mind.
Correct. Well, I used to have a joke with many of my colleagues and friends saying that the minute you can provide convenience to anyone, you're going to be a millionaire. Because if you look across the examples you cited, whether it's Airbnb, whether it's Grab, whether it's Uber, where there's a lot of the applications out there, it's about providing convenience to the end user, which is you and I. Ultimately, we want that, we enjoy that. We do not want a very tedious process, whether it's coming to reading news, whether it's watching our favorite television show or whichever. We just beg for convenience. So ultimately, the older business models, the more traditional companies that used to dictate how we consume, that has changed. And because that has changed, now this partnership and enablement across the ecosystem to feed into us, the end user who consumes it, has to change as well. And that's where the preparation and the mindset should actually, really transition across. Because from the past 20 years to the 20 years ahead, whoever you're talking to now is going to be a massively different audience. And it's feeding into that different audience, understanding the nuances of this different audience that you have to be prepared for.
The speed of change, it's not just Industrial Revolution 4.0, or migrate to IoT, or have a big data engine, but the speed of service, the speed of products being delivered, not just manufactured. So that needs not just one leap, but maybe 3, 4, 5 leaps. That's like the Star Trek beaming you somewhere. But you know that in ASEAN, I mean, we're great, but we must acknowledge that we have just have, some of us have less than 5, 6 decades of independence. And now what we expected, whatever comes out in Silicon Valley, whatever comes out in the Scandinavian countries, the next day we can absorb it and utilize it. So, when I look at the government providing grant of 245 million under the Domestic Investment Strategic Fund for smart manufacturing, the money might be there. The horse can go to water, but, the horse might not drink. Yeah. So, can you use your psychology perspective and analyzing the future since years, plus your experience in MDEC before.
Well,
how do we do this?
The first thing we always say is that you do not necessarily have to always keep with that change. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but rapid change occasionally is a nice to have rather than a must have. And we always put advice out saying that, if this is happening in whether it's in manufacturing, whether it's in agriculture, you need to be able to understand how this change is going to impact your business more so than just change for the sake of changing. You're absolutely right. We being in ASEAN, we are looking at a lot of things happening in Western Europe and the US and thinking, let's just pull that in right now and let's just adopt it right now. But it may not be suited for our market. It may not be suitable for the type of business we do or our culture for that matter. So overall, it's always that assessment that is required. Now, the stumbling block there is that assessment stage, that's what takes too long. Unfortunately, it gets dragged on year after year, and that's when no change happens. But we're seeing that mentality transition right now. Majority of people are starting to say, we heard about smart manufacturing, we understand about robotics, automation in the factory, for example. How do I implement this to save me money, increase my yield, increase production, and more importantly, increase quality? Because Malaysians, for example, right now, we're realizing quality actually means a lot to them. It's something a little bit different of a thinking.
I picture the Aeropolis in Sepang, where trucks after trucks, going straight into the belly of the plane, cargo planes that. We should be seeing as many passenger planes as cargo planes, cargo planes as many as passenger planes of the vibrancy. But how do we really compete? China has size, China has price, China has everything end-to-end supply chain. So would you, go for the school of thought where, hey, we discuss on not doing everything, but that thing that we want to do, what niche areas do you think we should really focus upon? For example, we cannot manufacture the next iPhone 11 or Samsung 10, whatever. But even if we manufacture the casing that makes it convenient to charge or to display or whatever it is, find our niche in the supply chain that we think is going to boom.
Correct. No, precisely. So it is really, that's where the support for whether it's the SMEs or the entrepreneurs out there who have very bright ideas to actually attach themselves to a larger ecosystem. That's where the motivation. So Dave,
I cannot hog your time anymore because that's all the time we have, but your view on COMA and what you're looking forward to?
Oh, I'm looking forward to great audience, great speakers, and of course to finally find, hopefully, that silver bullet on what we should do for the media industry for digital transformation.
Correct. I'm going to be among the starting part of COMA. Sudev is going to wrap everything up. That's going to happen on 14th and 15th of November, and we'll see you there. Shangri-La, good night and goodbye. Thank you so much.